All right, everybody. Breaking news today in the law being fair. Today in lawfare, depending on your view, Trump was found guilty on all 34 felony charges. You can choose your own framing here. Some say it's election interference. Some people are referring to this as the hush money porn star case. Other people are calling it the deep state lawfare case. The jury deliberated for about a day and a half. Trial lasted 6 weeks, included testimony from 20 witnesses. Key moment seems to have been Trump's CFO, Weiselberg, who's, I think, in jail right now for other charges, outlining the terms of the payments to Michael Cohen, the disgraced lying attorney who recorded Trump's conversations. And that's, I think, all I can tell you about this, except for maybe the sentencing is coming up. It's going to be July 11th, which is but 4 days before the RNC. Clearly a sad day for America. I'm not sure if anybody on the panel has any opinions on the Trump verdict, but let's just randomly start with you, David. Any thoughts on Trump being convicted of 34 felonies in this case?
Well, first of all, in terms of understanding this case, I think it's important to understand that both Merrick Garland's DOJ and former Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance, they looked at this case, they looked at these charges, and they passed on bringing this case. Alvin Bragg, who was a Soros-funded DA, he won a hotly contested race to succeed Vance by pledging to get Trump. And that's why he brought this case. And in order to bring these charges, he had to use a creative legal formula that turned a misdemeanor charge of falsifying business records, a charge that would have been past the statute of limitations, into a felony by claiming it was in the service of a second crime, but he never named exactly what that crime was or proved that it happened. And I think it's safe to say that a case like this, which is novel and creative and torturous, would never have been brought against anybody but Trump. Now, there's about 5 different grounds for appeal on this. Number 1, the judge is a Biden donor with a daughter who works for Biden. Number 2, prejudicial and irrelevant evidence was admitted that should have been excluded, including Stormy Daniels' testimony. Number 3, Trump was not able to call his expert in election law, former head of the FEC, Bradley Smith. Number 4, the prosecution never named the second crime. And then number 5, the judge let the jury pick from a range of options for what the second crime might be, including tax crimes for which no evidence was presented and federal election crimes for which the court had no jurisdiction. So my guess is that at the end of the day, this case is going to get tossed on appeal, but that's probably going to happen after the election, after November 5th. And Democrats now have what they wanted. They wanted to get out of this case 4 words: Donald Trump, convicted felon. And you're going to be hearing that phrase, convicted felon, repeated ad nauseum from now until November 5th. And I think that's the whole point of this case.
Freeberg, your take.
No, I mean, it felt like this was always a win-win trial for Trump. If he gets convicted, then, the conversation that we're hearing now, this was an unfair conviction. How could they do this? This is lawfare. And if he doesn't get convicted, they tried to burn him at the stake. How could they try and do that? Clearly, he's innocent. He was made innocent. So, it never really struck me as being a smart. I'm not a political guy, but the political calculus just seemed off on this entirely. It certainly wasn't clear what they were trying to accomplish. Either way, Trump looks good. And I think we saw tonight reports that his website for making donations crashed. A lot of people started making public statements on Twitter that are not typically Republican donors, that they're donating a lot of money to Donald Trump coming out of this. And so it is clearly infuriating a lot of people that, as Sachs points out, something that some people are considering to be, a bookkeeping or accounting crime has turned into 34 felony convictions. It feels unfair. It feels like the wrong decision. And it's going to infuriate people because people worry about the quality of the justice system. And anyone who's sitting in the middle as an independent or an undecided, I think it is much more likely that they are going to have sympathy for Donald Trump coming out of this, not admonishment.
Chamath, your take.
I think that if you went into this looking to confirm your hatred of President Trump, you were the one that was given red meat. And I think that if you were undecided or pro-President Trump, you probably found more reason to support him for all the reasons that Freeberg said. The thing that's unique about this specific trial that I found rather interesting was the diversity of people who just couldn't understand what this trial was about. Whether it was Bill Barr, who worked for him but was not a huge fan of his, nor was, Trump, or vice versa, right? To an Alan Dershowitz, to a Cyrus Vance, you had Democrats and Republicans and independents, legal scholars, legal experts, some who liked President Trump, some who did not, some who got along with him, some who did not, some who fought with him, some who did not, some who got fired by him, some who did not. And they were all categorically confused about what this whole thing was about. I'm not legally well versed enough to understand what it was. So as a layman, you then tend to go to this next obvious thing, which is you have to bucket this decision as, here are some experts and what they know is better than what I know. And we talked about this earlier on the pod today when it came to Fauci, and it turned out to not be so true. Or you go to this other place where are there systems of government that can be convoluted and turned in the favor of the majority who's in power against someone that they feel is a threat. And we've talked about that as well with respect to how some of these governmental institutions have targeted some of our friends. So I think that we're in a very precarious moment where the systems of governance in the United States are a little bit more fragile than they were the moment before.
Okay, if people were wondering what the case is actually about, falsifying business records, this is a pretty serious crime in New York City. Basically, when people don't keep correct records, when they're committing crimes, this is taken seriously in New York because it is the financial capital of the world. They've got a long history, whether it's, Bernie Madoff, Enron, et cetera, of pursuing these. I don't know why this didn't get communicated well to the public. But there were obviously tons of business records falsified here. And they basically admitted to it. Michael Cohen had pleaded guilty to it already. And so it really feels like a misdemeanor. And then to understand what happened after that, there is a law in New York, as Sachs correctly pointed out, on top of the falsifying of business records, which New York takes deadly seriously. And they put this in every indictment when people do it because they want the accountants, lawyers, CFOs to behave themselves and not cheat the public. The election interference, also taken very seriously in New York. There's been tons of cases. Again, typically minor things, but people who do things like try to stuff ballots, et cetera. And so you put those two together. If you do if you falsify business records and you do it as part of a second crime, which he did, which he was convicted of, then you get these penalties. So that is the explanation of the case. That was why he was found guilty. It's pretty easy to figure this all out. If you don't know all this, it's because you didn't take the time to read anything about the case in terms of the basic heuristics of it, which I think is because people are burned out on this. Trump has committed so many misdemeanors and crimes over time that we're kind of used to it. And, my personal take on it, and I'll just leave it at this, is I think it's going to be a speeding ticket. I do think it's going to get overturned. I think Trump has done this his whole career. I lived in New York. All these real estate guys were doing all these kind of like little ticky-tacky cheating things. And I do think that this was politically motivated.
What was the second crime, Jacob? If you understand the case
election interference.
Election. But what does that mean?
You're not allowed to interfere with elections. So the theory here, which the jury unanimously voted in front of over these 6 or 7 weeks, election interference was because Trump was in dire straits. After the Access Hollywood tape came out that weekend, when he admitted to assaulting women, the grab him by the blank came out. His team, in this case, admitted, including his assistant, Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, and of course the guy from the National Enquirer, Pecker, all of them agreed, testified, and just were completely honest that this payment and the reason they bought these people off was because they were scared that it would reduce his chances of being elected. They were in panic mode. They all testified to that. The jury found that they committed these crimes, the falsifying of business records, in order to save his election chances. So that is the legal concept. This legal concept was available to everybody for the last, since it's been filed in the New York Times. Anybody who doesn't read these basic things and comments on this case is just a partisan who doesn't want to accept the reality that these are actual legal concepts that are completely valid. Now, I do think, despite all of that and me making it abundantly clear to anybody that you don't want people falsifying business records, and you also don't want anybody interfering in elections, I do think it was politically motivated. So you got to keep two things in your mind at the same time. It's politically motivated. Trump commits crimes regularly, often, but they tend to be ticky-tacky fines.
You just said it was going to be reversed on appeal. So if you're so confident it's a crime, then why do you also say it's going to get reversed?
Yeah, because I think, I'll let me restate that. I think he's going to get a speeding ticket. I don't think the case is going to reverse. I think there's going to be some sort of a pardon. Now, this is a state kind of situation, so it wouldn't be Biden who would pardon it. It would be the governor. And I think what's going to happen is somebody like Trump, Teflon Don, he's called that for a reason. He gets away with it every time. He's rich. He's powerful, like all rich and powerful people. You have to really do something heinous to wind up in jail. So I think it's going to be a speeding ticket. I do think the documents cases, that one is a pretty legitimate one with the obstruction. And I do think the election interference, those are the two he should be really worried about. Because if he is found guilty on those are legit. But I do think this country is going to need to come together. I hate to be the bigger person here, but I do think the country needs to get together and get us two new candidates. And we can't be having this lawfare and politically motivated lawsuits every time somebody loses or they're afraid of losing an election. But
let me ask you a question, Jason. You're a famous, successful person. Over the next 10 or 20 years, the odds are pretty good you'll be more famous and more successful.
Say more, Chama.
Do you feel the less, the same, or more? Okay, you have to say less, same, or more.
Okay.
If somebody in government doesn't like what you're up to, after today, are you less, the same, or more in terms of the risk that the laws could be used to fight you?
I think we're kind of in the same area. I think there's always been politically motivated prosecutions that have occurred. That's part of, the flaw in our legal system. And I do think appeals, pardons exist as the relief valve for those things. And I think for rich and powerful people with great representation, they always get off unless they've done something incredibly, incredibly heinous. And I don't think this is incredibly heinous. And so when it's framed as simply, oh, it's a porn star, he banged a porn star, who cares? It was consensual and she got a payoff, or maybe she was extorting him even. I don't know if those details were ever determined, if you could frame it as extortion or not. I think none of that matters. Like this falsifying business records thing is just something they did. They should just own it. They should have just pled it out. And it should have probably never been escalated to the next level with the election interference. I thought that was a little bit of a stretch, but not that much of a stretch.
They got escalated because Alvin Bragg got elected to pursue this case.
And that's the only way you could get it from a misdemeanor to a felony.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is part of the lead in the case.
I know you're really giddy about this, Jake. I can hear it in your voice.
No, I'm not.
But
honestly,
look,
I wish.
All you're doing
No,
is
I'm going to stop you right
your...
there. No, sorry, Sachs. You don't get to say I'm giddy. I'm not going to tell you how you feel. You don't get to tell me how I feel. I actually am sad for America. I'm sad for America that Trump and Biden are our choices.
Okay, great.
So speak for yourself, not for me.
Okay, great. Well, maybe I'm just detecting enthusiasm in your voice. I'm not quite sure what it is.
No enthusiasm, not at all.
You're presenting these documents on the screen that are basically from Alvin Bragg's case. That's all you're doing is repeating his theory of the case, which I must say is extremely tortured. And it's novel. I don't think a case like this has ever been brought. And if you are going to bring a case against a former president, it should be for something more than ticky-tacky type stuff. Stuff that you yourself admit is politically motivated. It's obvious. Bragg was out to get Trump. This is a campaign strategy. You have to bend the law into a pretzel to create the case that you're describing.
Listen, I think Trump will continue to do these. He's had these long before he was in public office. He got tons of speeding tickets like this. He'll get them after he's out of office. He's always committed crimes. He's always done these minor things. What this reminds
me of is, you remember Ken Starr and what they went after Bill Clinton for with the whole Monica Lewinsky thing?
Sure.
And when that Starr report dropped, and then hundreds of pages of legalities, and they described all the prurient behavior in amazing amounts of detail. At the end of the day, the American people looked at it and decided that maybe there's a tawdry element to this, but it's personal behavior. And after some period of time, Clinton's popularity rebounded and he actually gained seats in the midterms because the Republicans overplayed their hand.
Yeah, totally.
And I think in a similar way, it's very clear to me, and in fact, you've already said this is politically motivated. And they basically have taken some sort of bookkeeping error that was a misdemeanor, that was past the statute of limitations, and they've combined it again with this very novel legal theory about somehow committing fraud in the election, which, by the way, was not actually proven in the case. And as part of the jury instructions, again, the judge allowed the jury to have a multiple choice on what the second crime was, which is what a lot of legal experts think will become the basis for appeal. So again, this whole case was tortured. It was politically motivated. I would go so far as to say it's a sham. It's an outrage. And I think people are reacting as though it's an outrage. And again, if you're going to bring a case, not just against a former president, but the current frontrunner to be the next president, it better be something important, not this ticky-tacky thing that the way you describe it as being ticky-tacky. Why even waste the public's time with this? Why even spend all the money pursuing this?
Well, I think
and I told you why.
As
Donald Trump convicted felon, that's the reason why. The media wants that talking point. And by the way, if you want to make a switcheroo and get a different candidate than Joe Biden, that's not going to happen now because Democrats and the media think that this is their salvation. They know they're running a candidate.
It's not going to be. The obstruction case and the January 6th case, those are legit cases. They should have just gone after those because those are the ones that are completely legit. But here we are.
The Democratic Party knows they're running a candidate who can't debate, who can't put two sentences together, who can barely find his way off a stage, whose policies are coming home to roost. The economy, like we talked about on the show, is slowing down very rapidly. His foreign policy is a disaster. But they think that somehow this is going to be his salvation, is being able to say that Donald Trump is a felon. That's their plan.
Yep.
And I think at the end of the day, this is probably not going to work.
All right, there you have it, folks. There's your quick hot take around the horn with your bestie on Trump being convicted by a jury in New York today. He'll be sentenced on July 11th, and we'll see what happens there.